May 6, 2020 Acton Finance Committee meeting to order. Good evening. It is now 7 o'clock. The open meeting of the Acton Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth and the local state of emergency declared by the Acton Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Selectmen has suspended all public gatherings, and in accordance with the governor's orders, all members of the public bodies are allowed to encouraged to participate remotely. The governor's order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as the reasonable public access is afforded to the public and can follow along with the deliberations of the committee votes of this meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. The meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Finance Committee is convening by Zoom video as posted in the meeting agenda, the town's website calendar identifying how the public may join. Please note the meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and anything that you broadcast may be captured for recording. We'll now be going to the first meeting agenda item. Okay. So give me a second. I just got to pull up the agenda, which I don't have open in front of me. I do apologize. Excuse me.
You have the agenda, Rowan?
Yeah, I guess got it in front of me. I just didn't want to see what it was. So that is our public participation part of our meeting. If there's anybody that would like to talk that is in the attendees, if they could raise their, let me know. Okay, so do we have somebody from the public that would like to comment? Can you please identify yourself?
Yes, it's Kara from West Acton. I have a couple questions and then a comment. And so my first question is, will we be able to speak about the drive-up windows proposal for town meeting, or is that going to be a different meeting? Because I have some feedback from West Acton.
It's not on the agenda. It's not on the agenda tonight. We're not discussing it.
Okay, thank you. So next question is whether or not I'll be able to speak during the point of view discussion, or whether I should give my comments here.
You can give your comments later on afterwards. If
after the point of view.
You can send them to us in an email.
Oh, I see. So you're not going to let me speak later on during the point of view discussion.
This is the time for public participation, as listed on our agenda item.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Peter. Very nice letter. I won't write to you and ask for a response. But I do appreciate the letter and the amount of thought that went into it. I really, really do appreciate that because the receipts, as I don't know if you saw Steve Noon's memo from a couple weeks ago, but, you know, receipts are expected to go down. And so I look forward to working with the schools in a sensitive fashion to ensure that we collectively support excellent school educational services and town services moving forward. And one of those, in that light, I'm proposing to the Finance Committee that we look at new growth revenues more critically so that we don't end up with thousands of more people some years past because we used the new growth revenues as a slush fund effectively, and spent that money instead of using that to buy land or trying to slow growth. One more minute, not even, just note that the other towns are splitting out their new growth revenues to make it clear how much is from new residential units and how much is from new commercial units, how much is from enhanced residential, like additions or porches or whatever, and enhanced commercial, and then fees. So you can see what we have control over and what we want to put our time and energy into increasing more productive tax revenues as opposed to just letting sort of residential growth happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry about that. That was on thing. So now we're going to come to the second one, which is the Acton Boxborough Regional School District Finance Department update with Peter Light and Dave Bertolino, and also we have Marie Altieri with us this evening.
So thank you so much for having us. As you know, we're in, not only a health crisis, but the middle of a financial crisis as well. And that's something that we've been thinking a lot as a school district. We're really pleased to be able to come and talk to you tonight and give you a little bit of an update as to where our finances stand for this year. But also, we're really in the very, very early stages of some preliminary revisions to our FY21 budget. We want to be sensitive to the changes in the economic circumstances, not only for our community, but we also need to be sensitive to the changes in our educational circumstances. And some of the educational needs that we anticipated, I think, are shifting as well on us. And we, are thinking about, possibility of reopening and what that might look like. And that will certainly have some financial implications for us as well. I'll be honest, we are so early in that thought process that there's just a lot of unknowns for us. That's going to be an ongoing discussion with our school committee over the next few meetings. And then, we'll have some more information at that point once the state gives us a little bit more information about what to expect. But then we're also preparing for the possibility of a 1/12 budget as well. And that's something that, we've been fortunate to have Dave Bertolino on board. He's extremely experienced in all things school finance related and just has been a tremendous resource. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Dave, and I just want to thank Dave and Marie because, as always, they are really the rock and cornerstone and just know our budget and details so intimately. And it's been a pleasure. So Dave, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you, Peter. Roland, can I ask you if you got the material that I sent to you earlier today?
I'm guessing he's looking now.
Right. So the real question is,
Looking now, sorry.
yeah, that's okay. The real question is, did you forward it to the other members? And so that answer must be no, given what you're doing now. Okay.
Yes, I did not check. Do you have it available to you right now?
And to do what?
You can share your screen. You can show us what you're talking about, or do you just want me to forward it to the committee?
If you can forward it to the committee, it's something that was just going to allow you to go along as I read along, okay, and look at numbers versus my face as I'm talking.
Sure.
So if Roland, are you forwarding it to the members now?
I am. Okay.
So I'll start and talk a little bit slowly because just to let that happen, and it's not a tremendously detailed summary, but budget subcommittee met earlier this week and they have seen this. There are two items. One of them is, I call it a budget snapshot. Budget subcommittee has seen that, and school committee will see it tomorrow. A bit of background. When I did the second quarter report to school committee, as I believe you know, we had projected at that time at year end, we'd be running about $500,000 to $600,000 in the hole. coronavirus was in the infancy of being in the news at that point, and a lot has changed since then. So I'm just going to talk about 4 of the categories, and as you get this and have time to look at it, you can look at the numbers and just not to audit what I'm saying, but just see that these are derived from our actual takeoff of the system through 9 months.
Dave,
First-
are those on the spreadsheet or on the PowerPoint?
So the PDF is something different. This is an Excel. What I'm talking about now is an Excel spreadsheet.
Thank
you. Okay. So a number of things have changed as a result of us not being in our buildings for the last 2 months and 2 months to go. From the standpoint of personnel, custodians, substitutes, and related overtime for a lot of personnel is not being spent. And so we had a very significant turnaround in costs in relating to those individuals and categories. The shutdown coincided almost exactly with what would have been the beginning of the spring athletic season. And so the coaches, who largely were accounted for in the budget, were not paid. As it turned out, they were paid a nominal amount for prior planning, but there was a significant budget savings by the spring sports season not being run. And then normal pickups, as typically happens during the year. And this is my 3rd year on the job here, and the salary projections start off pretty dire, tend to get okay, and then break through into plus territory as the year goes on. People take maternity leaves, other forms of unpaid leave, and that typically happens during the year, and this year was no exception. So all told, personnel swung very, very significantly from the negative to the positive. For facilities costs, if you don't heat and light a building, you save a lot of money. And when there are 9 buildings, you save even more money. We don't have a really good handle on how much money yet. We're waiting, frankly, for the April utility bills, which will give us a year-over-year of fully operational versus non-operational. The March bill was kind of a hybrid. So we've got a guess, but when we compare April to April, we'll have a better idea about the full extent of the savings. Transportation costs are down, mostly fuel that buses did not need to run. And there was some savings on capital projects as well. So again, another category where there was tremendous savings between the second quarter projection and now. Special education, projected tuitions is still showing a deficit. It's showing a less of a deficit than in the second quarter. It's improved through, again, the normal operating procedure of evaluating the appropriate placements. 1 or 2 students has moved out. And so the net effect has been some savings in out-of-district tuition. What could be happening is we're awaiting a decision regarding payment for out-of-district services for April, May, and June. We've paid the private providers through March, but there's conflicting guidance as to whether we should continue to pay them at their full rates or not, on the theory that they may not be providing for services, and Mass General Law says you can't pay for services that aren't rendered. The issue is that private providers have cost rates approved by OSD, a state organization, but we all know that there are costs that they're not incurring with a shutdown. They're not providing meals to kids. They're not similarly heating and lighting their buildings. And there's been a great inconsistency in the level of service that they're providing or not providing. And so my professional organization, MASBO, has been working on an initiative to look into this. And we're trying to enlist key people in the state government to look at this and give us some guidance as to a safe harbor, if you will, for what we could pay legally to these private providers, and less than the full rate, because we don't think that's appropriate. We don't think it's appropriate for them to receive the full tuition rate when they're clearly not incurring their full associated costs, by the way, on which those rates were developed, and additionally not providing the services to the extent that we're asking for. Oops. Finally, so each of those categories has, if you're with me now, and in the far right column, 2020 projected. And so what I talked about was personnel that we're projecting now 275,000 to the good.
What line number are you on, Dave?
That's at the bottom. So the numbers I'm going to be spouting right now are in the far right column, shaded green. So personnel is code 4, bottom of page 1, $275,000 to the good. Pupil services, flip the page, the very next one, $347,000 deficit. That's better. It was 4 and change the second quarter, so it's improved a little bit and could improve very significantly if we're able to discount the tuition payments going forward for April, May, and June to the private providers. This one's not shaded green. I don't know why, but facilities, halfway down page 2, $313,000 to the good. That could be better still, because utilities has a lot of money left in it, with the heating season past us, and the lighting season has been, we've been dark since mid-March for all intents and purposes. The last piece is, if you look at, as you flip through the 4 pages, you'll see the individual buildings, and you'll see departments like art, music, health, phys ed. Collectively, all of those administrative categories have over $500,000 remaining in their budgets as of right now. The rules are different. We would typically expect them to spend at or close to their allotted budgets, but that's not happening now. My team has been closing purchase orders that were encumbered during the year as appropriate. Supplies that may have thought to been a good idea in January when they were ordered, if the order hasn't been filled yet, if it was an open order, we're canceling those POs. Leadership is working on plans for approving spending for things relating to providing distance learning services from now until the remainder of the year. So there will be some more savings, but I don't know. It will depend on the extent to which the leadership believes that a portion, and what portion of that remaining $500,000 worth of instructional budget money ought to be spent for distance learning for the remainder of this school year. So, all things considered, the analysis that I sent you comes down and says $288,000, so about $300,000 to the good. I'm comfortable saying that we'll probably be in the $300,000 to $500,000 range of turnbacks on the expense side of the ball, as Steve Barrett says. I just have a quick comment to make on the revenue side, and then we can ask questions about FY20 if you'd like. The revenue side should be fairly close. In years past, we've been $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 to the good. I would say $100,000 to $200,000 maximum, and that depends on the final state reimbursement for transportation. I'm not anticipating, as late as today, we were told that your allocations are probably not in jeopardy for FY20, but the final payment is not until June, so we won't know for sure until we know for sure. I'm not expecting significant cuts to Chapter 70. I'll talk about this a little later, but in 2009, I was around then, not in Acton Boxborough, of course. The state initiated the drama to the budget cutting process by unilaterally making a Chapter 70 cut mid-year. We don't expect that to happen this year, and we've gotten very consistent guidance from DESE. Now, DESE are not elected officials. That could change, but they have put their necks on the line to assure business officials that it's probably your FY20 state aid is probably safe. So that's what I had relating to FY20 snapshot. I suppose, Roland, is it your call if you want questions, or should I continue with my presentation?
Does anybody have any questions at this point, or would you want to see Dave go through the rest of his presentation first?
Say go through the presentation, we can ask at the end.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so that was the operating budget for FY20. A couple of brief words about, and interestingly, you could say perversely, the shutdown was good for the operating budget financial picture, clearly. But it's not been good for the revolving funds, which are programs for which there's a fee for service or a tuition payment that supports the program. There's been bad news there, because for programs such as school lunch, they're not selling lunches. As you've read in the paper, they're selling food, they're giving away lunches. Those lunches will be reimbursable, but certainly not on the scale of regular school operations where they're feeding a couple of thousand kids a day. Community ed is getting absolutely pounded. Their regular programs not running. School facilities aren't being used, so they're not collecting fees for that. And extended day is obviously done at home now and not through the school district. And so they've lost a significant amount of revenue. All-day kindergarten and the pre-kindergarten programs, the school committee has authorized a refund for 1 month of program that wasn't held. And tomorrow night, we're going to be recommending that we refund for 2 more months. And so again, those programs are taking a hit on the revenue side. The deficits in funds like that would impact the calculation of E&D. The good news is we should be able to minimize or eliminate all of the deficits. So in the case of food service and community ed, all of community ed's programs, and pre-kindergarten, they all had sufficient fund balances to absorb what we projected in a month ago to be a $485,000 loss in FY20 for school lunch. They'll still have a positive balance at the end of the year. A $479,000 loss for the community ed programs. They'll still have over $1 million in fund balance at the end of the year. And pre-K will still have a balance close to $100,000, even with a projected loss of $123,000. All-day kindergarten was different, but we found some ways to mitigate what was expected to be a deficit balance at the end of the year. One of the Zoom conferences I was on with DESE, when the subject of revolving fund deficits was brought up, the guidance was, to be blunt, figure it out, folks. It's your revolving funds. You do what you have to do to make the issue go away. And so we have done that by charging special ed costs. So students on IEPs who are in the full day program, those costs can now be charged to special education. They always were in the past. Not sure why the practice was discontinued, but as you saw, the operating budget now has some room. And so by doing this, we should be able to mitigate the deficit in the all-day K. So that is it for FY20. So now I was going to go next to FY21. And that's where what I tell you will be a lot less authoritative. So our main contact at the Department of Ed is a man named Jay Sullivan. I've known him for many years, and he hosts every one of these DESE conferences. And his famous quote now, when he's asked the question about what's going to happen in FY21 to Chapter 70, to circuit breaker, to everything else, he says, your guess is as good as mine. He has conferences at least weekly, sometimes twice a week. There was a Zoom call today. And interestingly today, he said that the next bellwether, so the question on the table was, what's going to happen in FY21 relative to state aid? The governor has submitted a budget. The Chapter 70 amount that's in there for Acton Boxborough is in my Table 6 calculation. It's probably not going to happen, going out on a limb there. But the next thing to happen will be the House presenting its budget. That typically happens in April. But with things the way they are, they're delayed. Jay said that the House budget is not expected until Administration and Finance under the governor revises its revenue estimate for FY21. One step further, it's likely that A&F can't revise their revenue estimate without knowing two things: the nature and extent of federal relief that might be coming to Massachusetts, and just their own economic models. And there was a conference a couple of weeks ago from the State House where the predictions for the trough in state revenues was $3 billion, $4 billion, plus or minus from there. What that all means, how they can come up with mitigation, that's for the state finance people to determine. So we don't know the extent, if any, of cuts, and we don't know the time frame for when those cuts are communicated to us, including whether they're even sent to us by June 30th. They talked about the possibility that the state might even, due to the circumstances, be entering into a 1/12 budget mode for its budget. I'll digress a minute and just talk briefly about back in FY09. The state cut Chapter 70 unilaterally by 10%. It was $422 million. Over the next 3 years, there was federal stimulus money under the ARRA program, ARRA, consisting of state fiscal stabilization money and Ed Jobs grant money that restored about $380 million of that $422 million worth of cuts to districts. Acton Boxborough's cuts, and there were 3 at the time because you weren't fully regionalized then, was fully restored. Does that mean that a similar thing could happen? No, it doesn't follow that. But I did hear today that cuts will likely be based on the extent of backfill available to the state, and likely, possibly using the same MO as was done back in 2009 through 2013. Until then, we don't know what we don't know. Administration, Peter alluded to this, has been brainstorming about possible budget reductions in the event that revenues fall short. And in addition, we will likely have needs, educational needs, not reflected in the submitted budget to provide services for students to catch them up for the time that was missed in contact with live bodies. We understand that budget approval by the 2 towns hasn't happened yet, but we do assume that the towns are in the same position of uncertainty with their budgets. So the other thing I sent you was a 5-page guidance material from DESE regarding the potential for 1/12 budgets. I'm not going to walk through this. I assume you either are up to speed on this or you can read the information contained in that guidance. The takeaway is that the district needs to submit by June 1st to the commissioner a plan with budget information in it so that the commissioner can approve a 1/12 budget for Acton Boxborough.
Dave, what is a 1/12 budget, real quick?
I've got 2 more lines and then I'll get to that. The memo lays out information, but this is what I wanted to say. Detailed instruction forms, we're not starting the process yet because they're saying that instructions and templates for doing this submission to the commissioner will be out next week. So a 1/12 budget is something that's already in Mass General laws. It's typically something that for a regional school district would kick in when you didn't have sufficient votes of the member towns. So for example, if Acton voted to approve the district, this is under normal circumstances, forget COVID circumstances. If Acton approved the budget, but Boxborough did not, we would not have authorization to spend any money on July 1st. We would, in that situation, in that unusual situation, have needed to petition to the state authorization for what's called a 1/12 budget. And in very broad terms, that allows, with approval of the commissioner, that would allow a district to spend for the month of July 1/12 of its prior year budget. So in the event of a budget being $120 million, let's make the math round. For all intents and purposes, there are adjustments that come into play, but for all intents and purposes, the district would be authorized to spend $10 million in July, 120 divided by 12. All the while attempting to continue to get the membership to approve a budget. You follow? So the 1/12 is a stopgap when approval is not given. In this case, approval might not be given not because of disapproval, but because of inability to meet. And so the state is being proactive and putting out guidelines, not just for school districts, but Steve and Brian know this as well, for towns additionally, because without an appropriation of the legislative body of the community, you don't have authorization to spend any money in a new fiscal year. So that is what I felt was important to let you know about, and happy to answer questions.
Okay, Christy.
If we're looking at a 1/12 budget going into at least part of next year, how does that work relative to contract increases?
The 1/12 budget is a number, and the cities and I've been on a couple of Zoom conferences as far as how 1/12 budgets work. The one that was more specific as to what it entails dealt with cities and towns. And cities and towns are allowed to, I think the word was allowed, to increase its authority for the month of July if, for example, it had its annual debt service payment due in July and it had its annual retirement contribution due in July. Those are things which might otherwise you may not be able to afford because it's disproportionate for those months. I've not heard the same thing specifically for regions, but Jay did say today that information was going to be asked for on the template that they send out to us. So how they exactly do it, Christy, I'm not sure, but this is just extrapolating from what I've heard. They're going to see what our FY20 budget was. They're going to look at how much of that was funded by E&D versus assessments versus other revenue sources. And they're going to take into consideration whether they adjust the number. I don't know yet, but they're going to be asking for things like debt service, which we have a payment in July, Middlesex County retirement, which we have a payment due in July. And they will say, you have authorization to spend X during the month of July. That authorization will be as good as if it had come from town meeting. Town meeting doesn't specify whether contractual rates, what contractual rates we pay our employees with, and neither would this. So it's an authorization to spend money, and it would be incumbent on the school district for its part and the cities and towns for their parts to make sure that their intended outflows in the month of July don't exceed what their authorization is. And again, all the while hoping that town meetings are held and budgets are voted because, and I forgot to say this, it's very important, the instant that that budgets are voted, the 1/12 plan is moot and vanishes. And now spending authorization is on an annual basis, and we go normal operating procedures.
If I just add there for a sec, Christy. So the negotiated salaries go into effect July 1st, regardless of the 1/12 budget. The thing the schools have going for them is many of our salaries do not get paid in July and August. So if we had the 1/12 budget for July and or August, then all of our school year people don't get paid until September.
And just one last point on that is the teachers who do get paid through the summer, that's out of FY20 funds, which are encumbered, and it's not FY21 money.
I'm guessing that's me. Quickly, in the case of a 1/12 budget, when I presume individual taxpayers' bills don't change because the budgets haven't changed, apart from handling debt and other things that they allow you to do. Is there then a catch-up tax bill effectively? I'm sorry, this might be for Steve Barrett.
It is.
Okay. Is there a catch-up tax bill to help cover the difference once the real budgets kick in?
So I think we'll be, thank you, Christy. We'll be waiting for some guidance on that. That's a great question. We haven't had a 1/12 budget in 20 years since I've been here. So it'll be very challenging. As Dave said, that you just can't take 1/12 of the number, because in July we pay Middlesex retirement system. We have some debt in July and August. So those are kind of cash flow adjustments to the budget. When you talk about the impact on the tax bills, how the tax rates are set for FY21, it's going to be very interesting. And as Dave said, it's going to come down to when the state puts the stake in the ground on state aid.
Another question?
Yeah, I'm waiting for Roland to let us know who's talking next.
Jason
has his hand up first.
Jason, go ahead.
Thank you.
Then Steve.
So if we enter a 1/12 budget, and I'm just very curious how this works. If we enter a 1/12 budget, that means theoretically we could spend 8% of the amount of 8% of the amount of money that we spent the year before. 8% of your budget is higher than your maximum possible E&D of 5%. So first question is, where does that money come from? And secondly, is the authorization to spend backed by the state? Because there's been so my first question is there a potential cash flow squeeze because you've just been authorized to spend 8%, but there's no way you could possibly have 8% in the bank because you're limited statutorily to being 5% of D&D. Does that make sense?
It does. And so there are two aspects to 1/12 budgeting and financial transactions. One is the legal authority to spend money, and two is the practical authority to pay money, i.e. cash flow. The cash flow aspect of this, and like Steve, I've not experienced this before, but the cash flow aspect of this will need to be we're a partnership, the district and the two towns. The bulk, 80% of our wherewithal as a district comes from assessments. The first assessment payment is typically due July 1st. So from my standpoint, Jason, our cash flow is going to come from a check from the town of Acton and a check from the town of Boxborough. But the cash flow abilities of the two towns, that's not my lane. And so we'll need to be, if it gets to that point, we'll need to be talking about the ability to fund these operations. Even if they're legally permitted, you have to have cash in the bank to be able to write the check.
Thank you. Steve, you're up. He said you were
Steve, no.
next.
Okay. So a couple of things. First, if the state if we're waiting for the state to talk about FY21 and the state's waiting for the federal government to give them money, then we're in this kind of, we can go around in a circle forever. 2009, yeah, we got money from Ed Jobs. 2009 was the first year of the Obama administration. Mitch McConnell was the minority leader in the Senate. Nobody was talking about allowing states to go bankrupt. So, yeah, we could see a 10% cut in Chapter 70. Governor Baker could use his 9C authority and cut a whole bunch of executive departments. I don't think any of that's happening in the next couple months. But yeah, as Dave said, the revenue forecasts for the state are in the $3, $4, $5 billion miss category. The rainy day fund is only $3.5 billion. That's the biggest number I've ever seen, but it's not big enough. Now the state, like us, I guess, the state can sell revenue anticipation notes, tax anticipation notes to the federal government. It's a short-term cash flow system, so the state can raise money. I don't think we're big enough that the Fed is going to buy anything from us. I don't know, Steve Barrett, can we issue revenue anticipation notes?
They would have to be authorized. But let me just jump in 1 second. I mean, we're planning on issuing the FY21 preliminary tax bills by June 30th, due August 1st. So we are allowed statutorily to issue those, and those will be issued for approximately 50% of the FY20 bill plus 2.5%. So that, Jason's thoughtful question on, gee, I hear you, but how can you go 1/12 if you don't have 8% in the tank? The liquidity and the cash flow of the town right now, again, is primarily dependent on the property tax levy. And the plan right now is to issue preliminary tax bills as allowed by state law. And you say preliminary, that's everybody sends out the first 2 quarters before you set the tax rate in the November-December timeframe. And then to Christie's point, the tax bills get squared up in the 3rd and 4th quarter. What that square up looks like is going to be very interesting, but we are planning on issuing tax bills for the first 2 quarters.
If I may, Roland, can I continue? Quick question for Steve. Well, this last quarter, we extended the payment time frame. Are we going to do that again for the July 1st bill?
Well, John Mangiarotti has a presentation prepared on the town side. That's something that's going to have to be discussed with the board and John.
Okay. So getting back to where I was, I don't think we have a 2020 problem. Whether anybody's willing to say it right now and give a number, and I understand why they aren't willing to do it, we have a FY21 problem. It's not going to be what we expected. Now, whether the state is able to kick the can down the road and get some cash from the feds for the short term, that's certainly a possibility. Whether actually there will be federal stimulus money coming for Ed Jobs like there was in 2009, I'm less optimistic about that. So I don't think we have to do a whole lot right now, except make a plan for whatever we consider to be our worst case scenario and hope we never have to use it. But I do think we need to make a plan.
Roland, is it okay if I make a comment on that?
Jason, go ahead.
Oh,
I'm going to let Superintendent Light speak first, and then I'll ask my question because my question is actually for him.
Sure. Steve, I think that's a great point, and that's something we've already been talking about with our school committee budget subcommittee. And we're going to be talking more about, in the next few weeks with our school committee. But our administrative team is actually looking, it's not really a plan. What we're really trying to do is create a series of plans for varying circumstances, because I think, the most challenging aspect of all of this from a financial standpoint, just like an educational standpoint, is the unknown. And so, we also want to be very sensitive to the fact that it's probably not just an FY21 problem, it's probably an FY22 problem. And as Dave and I have talked, FY22 could be more of a challenge than FY21. So, our approach right now is creating a series of plans that are responsive, to, just the general sense within the community that, people are struggling to pay bills. Income is, insecure for a lot of families right now, and we need to be sensitive to that as a school district. That's kind of in round one of our plan. Also in round one of our plan is, kind of withholding a set amount of money for the unknown expenses related to, how we're going to have to operate next year. And that means we're going to be having to make some changes to our budget for FY21, and some things we thought we might be doing now may not happen. So, that's just the reality of where we're at. And then we're also in the process of developing, plan B and plan C, if we have to really, make some extreme measures. But, we're trying to be thoughtful about it. And I just want to, reassure you that's definitely at the top of our mind.
So that goes.
You can call it a series of plans or a list, or it generally goes from the things you really wouldn't miss that much to things you really don't want to ever have to do, and you take them in priority. But you're right. The Great Recession was a 3-year event for this town. Revenues didn't come back to where they were for at least 3 years.
So what I was gonna ask, and I'm glad you just said what you said. I was going to ask that you actually have a best case scenario budget, a rosy, fantastic, Congress to the rescue, Deus Ex Machina style. But I also would like to see the worst case scenario budget as well, that includes all the things that feasibly could go wrong, including, if you would please take a minute to discuss the possibility of or the information the guidance that you've received from the state about having classroom sizes be limited to 15 students a class, and just how big a truck would that drive through the budget process if that were indeed the rules that we have to live under come August, 22nd, 23rd, when we get back to school.
Yeah, I think I think probably the approach we're taking is more of what Steve said, that it's not, developing specific scenarios, but instead it's more of a prioritized list. And I know, the last thing and I think in our own thinking about how we want to prioritize needs, we have to be really cognizant of the fact that, unlike in 2009, where schools were pretty much operating as normal all year, we're coming back after students essentially won't have been in school for 6 months. And we're going to have really, really high student needs coming in. And so what we might have prioritized in 2009 may not be the priority in 2021. So we need to make sure that we have the teachers in place for kids, and that we have enough support systems in place for kids. And that's really our biggest priority that we have to try and maintain at all costs. And so as we develop a prioritized list, it's what doesn't hit that first. And then, obviously working your way through to, more grave scenarios as we go down that list. Repeat the second part of that, Jason, I apologize.
I was just asking if you could comment on the potential damage of 15 students in the classroom, because that's not a priority. That's a mandate, potentially. I don't want to overstate the case, right? Yeah. But if that's the guidance that you've already received, you've got to have some inkling as to just how bad that would be. And is it just how much damage would that theoretically do? And what does that do to all the rest of your priorities?
Well, if you wanted to cut class sizes in half, then you would hire twice as many teachers, lay off everyone else, and still increase your budget by 25%. So, that's not a realistic scenario of being able to do. So I think, the more realistic scenario that we're hearing being discussed in other states and probably soon to be discussed in Massachusetts is, a need to think about how students are brought into school, staggering schedules, looking at, different types of hybrid situations where there's some online instruction and distance learning going at the same time there's, live learning. I think it's complicated right now. We know that we're going to be coming back with some types of social distancing measures. I think we're going to learn more out of the governor on May 18th that will allow us to continue to plan. Right now, our thought process is that we're going to be, reserving a chunk of money in the FY21 budget that is going to be unallocated, specifically to respond to the needs that develop over the next few months. And if we don't have to spend it, that's wonderful. And we can return it the following year and, hedge the FY22 budget that way. But if we need it, then it's there and it's, hasn't been spent in other ways. So it's challenging. I just don't have a good, clear answer for you, Jason, as to exactly what that's going to look like next year.
Understood.
Peter and Dave, I have a couple of questions, kind of. One is, I was by the schools. I cut through Charter Road on Sunday. I noticed that they were doing some paving up at the junior high, which is good to see them take advantage of the downtime with that. With that said, the ball field being redone down at the high school. With that said, are they going to be able to start on the twin school project ahead of schedule due to this, where they had a plan before of kids getting out of school? Well, now the kids are not going back, and it's the beginning of May. Can they get a head start on this? So
see, Peter, it's not just me. It's not just me asking that question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Roland. And I would love to say that, as soon as we knew schools were closed, we could start putting shovels in the ground. Mm-hmm. The reality was, when we passed the building project back in December, what we authorized first was to finish the design of the school and then to start the construction of the school. And so, there's an MSBA process to go through design, and there's just a reality that the design takes significant time in planning, permitting, things like that. And so, there's a series of construction documents that have to be developed and then approved by MSBA. That schedule is still relatively locked in. What I will say we were able to do is, we are starting to drill, the test geothermal wells, coming up in the next week or so, because we're going to have access to that campus. And even though they're the test wells that allow us to determine the actual total number of wells we'll need, those actually will be the geothermal wells. So they just get covered and stay in place during construction. So there's elements of the project that can get accelerated, but then there's other elements that are just dependent on completing the design first. So I don't think we're going to get so far ahead. I think where we can get ahead is adding the modulars. We're already starting to decommission the couple of classrooms at Gates that have to come off the building. Prepping electrical, plumbing, so that we can tear those classrooms down as soon as possible. So I think it's more of a safety buffer than what I would call an acceleration of the project.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear they're still moving forward some things that would have had to wait anyway. So I want to thank you for everything you've done so far.
Thank you.
And thanks, Dave, for being a good steward of resources.
Thank you, Roland.
Yeah.
Any further questions from the Finance Committee? Okay, we'll move on to our next exciting agenda topic, and that is Mr. Barrett. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Thank you both. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you. So now our next agenda topic is the Finance Department update with Mr. McMullen and Mr. Barrett.
Hey, Roland, John Mangiarotti will give the presentation tonight. Mr. McMullen and I are ready to answer questions when John's done, but John's going to take the presentation and give the presentation.
Great.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'd like to share my screen, if that's okay. Roland, is that all right?
Hang on. Yes, that's fine, John.
So you should see a PowerPoint. Are we good?
Not yet. It's
Yes,
thinking. Yeah. Up there we go.
Now we're good?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. So this COVID-19 pandemic has really been something that has created challenges in many ways, and we've been working as a community to address all of them. Right from the beginning, we knew that there were going to be some financial challenges associated with this public health crisis, so we were closely monitoring and tracking it right away. And over the last month, we've made some presentations to the Board of Selectmen, and about a week or two ago to the Finance Committee. And there were some questions that we wanted to make sure that we followed up on, and that's what we have before you tonight. So I'll just walk you through a few slides, and we have hopefully have time for questions. As we all know, this is something that is unprecedented for 100 years. We have a recession that we haven't seen here for at least a decade. Job losses, unemployment has skyrocketed. All these different factors are lining up to make it a very disruptive time to have a organization and try to prepare a budget for next year. But we also have a little bit of good news amidst all of this bad news. Right when this started, we were in the middle of getting our bond rating looked at, and they came back and gave us the highest rating from Standard & Poor's, a AAA for our long term. And then just last week, actually, we got another call from S&P, and we were a little concerned why they were calling us. But it turns out they just wanted to double check a few things. And after they did that, they reaffirmed our SP 1 plus rating, which is the highest that they issue for short-term bonds. So that's a little bit of good news that the rating agencies are following us and think we're doing a good job. But so here's the question that came up. It's revenues. What's happening with revenues? So I'm pleased to report that the revenue situation is pretty stable. I think that this is all good news that we're going to be sharing with you, but there are certainly some questions that we're going to need to start thinking about for next year. So as of today, or as of last week, I guess, we've collected 92% of the real estate taxes. And if you're asking how much of the fourth quarter taxes have we already brought in, because as you know, the Board of Selectmen voted to move the deadline from May 1st to June 1st. I'm pleased to report that as of April 30th, we had already received 70% of those taxes, and we've received a few payments, or several payments this week. So the delay has not impacted materially at this point. We have already received 88% of our motor vehicle that we budgeted for, 83% of what we budgeted for permits and fees we've collected, and our investment income, we've hit our target for what we budgeted for this year. Monthly state aid, Dave Verlino mentioned earlier, he has some optimism about state aid. I share that optimism, but I'm still cautiously optimistic. As of now, we've received all of our state aid and haven't heard otherwise that we would lose any going forward. So all this, one thing that we heard loud and clear is that we wanted to see a cash flow statement, a cash flow analysis. So we put this together based on where we are as of April 30th. And I'm just trying to move the people out of the way here. Can you guys see it? So as of April 30th, we started that day, or we started the month of May with a balance of 16 million. And then, so if you look at that, and then what's shown here are the revenues that we're projecting very conservatively to bring in through the end of the year, and then the 4 warrants that we project to be paying out as we do it every other week. There are 4 warrants left. So if you take the 16 million and estimate another 269,000 for motor vehicle, estimated another 4.5 million in real estate. This revenue estimate is very conservative. This is considering that we leave 10% from fourth quarter uncollected. So we're being very conservative with this number. Local receipts, we're estimating another 100%, and state aid 150%, 150,000, which is again conservative because we're projected to get more than that. So if you carry that through, at the end, after we spend the money that we're expected to spend, the balance on June 30th is conservatively estimated at 5.6 million. So some of the things that go into that are what potential shortfalls would we see? Meals tax, as you can imagine, our meals tax, we usually bring in, I think, 90,000 a quarter. We can't plan on that for this fourth quarter, but I think we did pretty well the other 3 quarters. So state aid, as I mentioned, it's an unknown. I think with those factors combined, we're not expecting to be short any more than 100 to 300,000. And in that scenario, if it does happen, we're confident that we can solve that shortfall through turnbacks that we've worked very hard to make sure that we generate at the end of this fiscal year. So what does it look like if the cash flow, if our conservative measures come in and we have 10% uncollected, for example, if that happens, it may impact our ability to replenish 2 million, which is what we plan to do. And our goal, as we've talked about, is to try to maintain our reserve levels. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the expense measures that we're doing to help supplement any concerns we have with revenue in the next slides. So what we've done, starting on March 23rd, we implemented an immediate spending freeze on anything that wasn't related to the response to this pandemic. We implemented a hiring freeze that same day, which is in place indefinitely until things change. Those 2 measures have really made a difference. We had several key positions that we were in the process of hiring, and we've had some vacancies that we were planning to fill that we just have held on. So that combined with the spending freeze and just a general tightening of controls that we've put on, and Steve Barrett and Brian have worked the departments over like they do, have really helped to make sure that we hit our $1 million target and hopefully more for an expense turnback to help supplement any revenue shortfall. We're also working very hard to make sure that we track any expenses we have related to COVID-19. As of right now, we think that what we've spent so far is in the range or under 50,000. A lot of that is nursing, public health. We've had to pay overtime for our public safety folks to make sure that we have replacement coverage if people are out. We've purchased a lot of protective equipment, as you've heard a lot about, and we've also done a lot of cleaning, a lot more cleaning than we normally would do. We're bringing in private third parties to totally disinfect facilities, vehicles, and things that we wouldn't normally be doing. We also have a robust communications and outreach program, which has included mailings to all residents and several other things that we've been trying to do to keep people informed. So those are the primary things we've been spending the funding on, and none of these things are going to materially impact our 20 budget. And things that do cost us money related to this, we're working hard to make sure that we get reimbursed. The FEMA and MEMA program usually would provide 75% reimbursement for eligible expenses. Assistant Town Manager Mark Hall and Town Accountant Lisa Wojcik are doing a great job of tracking those expenses. Ever since that early March, we've been having separate spreadsheets, and actually recently we actually created new line items in Munis so that there's a specific line item for COVID-19 expenses. This will allow us to track it closely, and it will also allow us to report out on it when we're applying for these reimbursements to FEMA and MEMA. So this is where it gets a little interesting. As you know, town meeting in December overwhelmingly supported our fire station project. for debt exclusion. It also was pretty well supported at the ballot the next week. And like the school project, we started, the next phase of it was to start the design or to finish the design. And we're nearing completion of that. The Conservation Commission saw the plan today, and I believe they approved their part of the permitting process. So we're well on our way. But in March, we were scheduled to go out and issue a bond. And I believe it was the 23rd. And that was just at the point where everything changed. So we had planned on a 30-year issuance, and we had it all set up to go. And then this situation, we found that there was no buyers, there was no interest in 30-year commitments, and our advisors advised us to pull out of the market. So we pulled out, and since then we've been working very hard to understand what's happening now, what could be happening in the next 6 months, and what's our best course of action. So the plan that we've come up with is to issue short-term notes for this project, and that will allow us to take advantage of our strong rating. It will allow us to have a competitive interest rate for a year to have the funding to do the project, and it will also allow us to get some space between now and hopefully the markets will be in a better position next March when we're targeting to go back out. So we can go into some details if there's any questions about the specifics, but it will cost us short. It'll actually cost us less on the short term for next year in FY21, which will have some benefits to the work that we're doing to try to prepare any changes that we may have for the 21 budget. So as we start thinking about the 21 budget, and we have an ALG meeting coming up in a few weeks, which we'll be prepared to make some comments and recommendations and thoughts, and we'll work with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. We really look forward to hearing your input. But it's worth mentioning that there was a lot of concern what would happen to us in 20 from this situation. And I think what we just showed you demonstrates that because of the strong commitment of our citizens and their civil duty, paying their taxes on time, and the great work of our boards and committees and the volunteers and our strong staff, professional staff, and the reserve position that we're in has really helped us get through this, and I think it'll help us in 21 and beyond. And in times where there's fiscal challenges and difficult ways to understand how to get budgets, find ways to spend money, having a bottom line budget really gives us flexibility and helps us to apply resources where they're needed and reallocate things on the fly, which is really helpful. So we look forward to any comments or questions. And I just wanted to have a plug in there to make sure that you understand we are advocating folks to vote by mail for the June 2nd municipal and special state election.
Thanks, John. You want to stop sharing your screen so I can see who's going on here? Thank you. Jason.
Thank you very much for that presentation. First, I'm very happy to see that there's not a cash flow problem. Seeing that percentage of the tax bill come in is very, very reassuring. And having $5.6 million on hand at the end of the year apparently is going to come in extra handy if we go into a 1/12 budget on July 1st. How does the 70% of the fourth quarter taxes received to date, how does that compare with last year? And the corollary question of that is, did we see, I see we're getting we got 7% in already, that's great. But did we see any of the escrow accounts not come in, or did they all come in properly? I'll let you go start with those.
Steve did a great job in communicating with those escrow companies to make sure that they paid on time, and many of them paid early, actually. Steve, have any not paid that we're aware of?
No, sir.
Great. So that was one of my big fears, which I was very vocal about. I'm very glad to hear that did not come into play. I'm glad I was running Chicken Little on that one, but it definitely had scared me. So I'm very very relieved to see that indeed came in. I do have a question about the those residents that do decide not to meet the May 1st deadline. I don't know if Brian McMullen's on there. Yes. I did have an instance a couple of quarters back where I paid on time. I absolutely paid on time. Let's not start a rumor here. I paid on time, but I did receive a note from the mortgage holder saying, "Hey, you're later than normal. We've been the Middlesex. We received something from Middlesex County saying that you're running late. You need to get back online, or you might have to go back to being in an escrow account." Brian, have we reached out proactively so that citizens that do not pay by May 1st do not get those warning letters? First of all, Brian, do you remember what I'm talking about?
I don't, Jason, but those warning letters, they're not coming from the town. They're coming from, I think, the third-party vendors that get electronic copies of our files. And so what they do is they run delinquency list. So basically, if your bill is due May 1st, they'll ask the town to run a list of delinquent accounts, say 14 days later, say May 14, May 15. And then from there on, they'll take that information and they provide it to the mortgage holder, so the mortgage holders know whether the taxpayer's account is delinquent or not. I think that's what you're talking about. Because there's a 30-day stay here, I'm not sure how that's going to play in, whether these mortgage companies or these third-party agencies are still going to play that same rule with the mortgage companies. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Do we as a town have the ability not to?
It's not coming from the town.
Well, other than the town is reporting what's in quote unquote delinquent. But if
yes, absolutely, we run those files all the time. Absolutely.
Right, but have we changed our definition? Right. So my question is, have we changed our definition? Because the time I got the letter, I wasn't even delinquent. So I'm curious why. I'm just worried that there's something that we can do to make sure that those letters aren't warranted.
We can talk about that internally and see if there's something we can get around. Absolutely, Jason. Yep.
Appreciate that. I think it's something to look into.
Yep.
And then the last thing that I would say is please do get to us in advance of that ALG meeting what the new budget expectations are. Or conversely, just know that it might take two ALG meetings, so that I'm trying to protect Roland and Christy here. They're probably going to want to come back and speak to the committee before agreeing to consensus on a new budget.
Absolutely. So, like Peter and Dave said earlier, we are evaluating several scenarios for next year, and I think we will have more information on the 20th than we have today, but we may not have all the information that we need. A lot goes into if town meeting does get scheduled or not. So I think that we're going to continue to watch that closely, and we certainly will get information to you and the Board of Selectmen as soon as we're in a position to have some presentation ready stuff.
One of the numbers that we need to run just as a committee is if we do hit a 1/12 budget, if we've got 5.6 million in town reserves, we've got the schools E&D, and we've got the estimated Q1 taxes going out, does that put a squeeze on anywhere, or are we good for 3 months? I'm just trying to see where things get scary.
Right. So we have several, as Dave mentioned earlier, there's several big ticket items that get paid in July. Our retirement assessment, things like that. So we would have to work with our vendors to understand if there's any ways that we can change how we pay those things. We've already started doing that on sort of smaller vendors, just to give them a heads up that 1/12 budget is something that a lot of people are looking at. But yeah, those are all considerations. In addition to talking to the district and our other folks about any changes they can make to how they assess us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Steve, and then Christy.
Yeah, is our free cash accessible for a 1/12 budget?
Yeah, the DOR is putting out some guidance, Steve, they're pretty much right now, legally, free cash is available right now. Again, if you can't get the town meeting to appropriate it, I believe it is available. And that's where things get a little sticky if you think about it, because you say on one hand, we spend 100 million, 1/12 of that, as Jason said, is 8 million and change. And if your reserves are less than that, so the math doesn't quite line up, but I'm confident that with preliminary tax bills, at least for the first 2 quarters, and a strong tailwind going in, we're going to be fine. But as the school folks said, what's that cut going to be? The town, state aid for the town side, we get about $1.5 million, a little more than that. A state aid cut to the town is not a significant blow, but we're a school town and we support the schools, and so how that state aid cut impacts them, hence ALG, that's going to be the plan. But yeah, DOR is putting out some guidance like I've never seen before.
Fire station. We haven't done the big borrowing yet. My understanding is this isn't like a mortgage. If we borrow the bond, we have to pay it back over that time period. It's not like we could just say, okay, we didn't build the fire station, so we give all the money back. When the citizens approved this fire station, it was a completely different economy. We had record low unemployment. We're now in a situation where 50% of Americans have had their household incomes affected by what's going on. I don't think we should blanket assume that we're going ahead with the fire station, at least as currently designed. I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about that or planning around that financially.
Other than our point of view change?
Well, we haven't gotten to that part of the discussion yet.
Oh, but everyone's read it.
John.
Yeah, so we understand your concern, but the project is something that the Board of Selectmen we're committed to doing, and the town meeting asked us to approve it, and we're on our way. As I mentioned, Conservation approved part of it today, and we have not had any discussions about changing the schedule for the fire station.
What would be your, if I may roll in with a question to Christy or Jason,
Sure.
What is the argument for not going forward with the fire station?
I'm not saying don't go forward with it. I'm saying don't go forward with it right now. I'm not buying a new car in this situation. People are hurting. Every penny we can save helps.
We also, if I might add, we were looking at a sort of a pretty high end state of the art facility with a lot of capabilities that maybe don't meet, maybe weren't 100% necessary, but wanna haves. And we are going to look at 2-3 years here where people are going to be struggling financially to meet their tax bills, to struggle through whatever we're gonna go through here. Small businesses and the town's budgets are gonna take hits, and the schools are gonna take hits, and there might be a fiscally responsible alternative that we should be looking at instead of the Lamborghini that we originally designed.
So, John, my suggestion is, rather than put in an $11 million fire station for all of that equipment, I would much prefer to see a small satellite EMS station rather than an $11 million fire station. Furthermore, I think we probably put in, we've got one site already set. I can imagine that it would be much more fiscally responsible to put in a $2 million paramedic outpost, because that's the service that the town actually needs. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that what was brought up on Budget Saturday is that there was one fully engulfed fire in all of Acton last year. but there were 3,500 EMS cases. So I would much prefer we do something that is more tailor-made to serve the citizens at a value rather than an $11 million fire station. So I believe that this is the time to given the gut-wrenching change that we're all going through. I think now is the time to reevaluate the opportunity, because they have not taken the money out yet. We have the ability to potentially scale this back.
Can I jump in here?
Steve and then Sahana.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. If you want to talk about the economic hurt of taxation, then look at the schools, because that's where all the money is. The fire station is peanuts in comparison. So if that's your rationale, you're going up the wrong route.
Understood, but the school
stop the school. If you don't be two-faced about it. We're either spending money or we're not spending money. As far as I'm concerned, we need the fire station more than we ever did before.
And I would point out that the school is state leveraged, and I would also point out that it's farther down the trail. It's harder to stop that at this point. And also, yes, absolutely, the school is trying to cut back everything it can in this environment.
I could not be more opposed to this.
Sahana, and then Mike.
I was going to wait until the point of view to have this discussion, but since you guys are already talking about it, we really have to be looking at the tax burden. What's happening here? We have 4 projects, and out of that, 3 have been approved. And the schools are going to add anywhere between 450, 500. I don't have the number right here. And the Minuteman is going to be $75 per year, and the North Acton Fire Station was $75 per year. So we are looking at a total without the Kelly's Corner, which is still not approved. So I'm not including that here, somewhere between 600, 650. And, if we are talking about increasing the tax base, we should be actually giving back something to everyone. If we look at slide 6 in the point of view, the demographics for Acton has 74% of people without any kids in the schools. And here we are talking about increasing, the tax burden to all the people, and which is very high right now. So, I would actually, for this particular reason, I would not put off reconsidering the North Acton Fire Station. Of course, there are other, for Jason's point, you do have, having just a satellite center. There were other discussions that happened when we were going through this entire project, why it was really needed at this point. You cannot wait for a catastrophe to happen, but, instead be prepared. And we have, the way that the town has grown in North Acton, it's very important when you look at the response times and things. So if you're really looking at being fair to every citizen in this town, we really need to consider the burden for all of the projects, not just for this.
Mike?
Yeah, what Sahana is saying is true, but just getting back to the North Acton Fire Station, I think we have to move forward with that, because if you're talking about a redesign, you're talking about a sunk cost, walking away from several $1 million that you already spent in design costs and getting the thing approved. I don't know, it was $2 or $3 million we already spent. Plus, every month that you delay construction, whatever the design looks like, there's going to be a construction inflationary factor added to that. That fire station will become even more expensive with every month that it's delayed. And it's not just that it's a fire station, it's that it's any municipal project, including the school. If the school was delayed, the cost of the nature of construction these days, it's you're just going to pay a premium by any kind of delay, whatever. So we should be prepared for that because of the COVID-19 issues, but if you're talking about, well, maybe this isn't what we want now, and you're going to start over, the cost would be absolutely through the roof. Well, they're already through the roof, but they'll even be through the atmosphere or the ionosphere, start knocking down some satellites.
Christy?
Aware of the unintended consequences of delay.
Assuming that Mike is not fully tapped into the construction situation right now, people I know in construction are losing work left and right. There is not the construction cost inflation that we've seen in the last few years. I don't know people working at this level, but not too far off of it. They are in very different markets than we are, but I don't know that we can function on the same assumption we had in much earlier discussions about this. I, for one, am not proposing that we stop the fire station. I am proposing that we consider a stopgap, as Jason stated, of a smaller project station right now. People are seriously hurting. This is something we have not started doing yet. It is a way that we can help the average person. It's not everything. I would love to cut the school budget as much as possible, but that has a whole bunch of other requirements around it, which unfortunately the fire station doesn't. This is a place that we can do some serious savings. We need to at least discuss it.
Steve?
This is at least the third attempt in the last 30 years to do this. I am convinced, and I have no data to back this up, if we delay it to redesign it, we'll never do it, because times are going to get tougher than they are right now. It's not going to get built next year or the year after. We won't even start thinking about this for another 5 years again. So we had an overwhelming support at town meeting and at the ballot box. I don't see the purpose of this committee to be to thwart the will of the voters of Acton. There's plenty of other ways we can save the amount of money that's going to cost us.
I myself agree with Steve. And Dave Martin? You're on mute, so.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I wanted to say at this point, as far as I know, this is just a select board decision. So if we wanted to stop it, we could stop it. I think if we redesigned it, it'd be a different story. But if we wanted to stop or delay it, we could do that. And if you guys want to send a recommendation to the select board, you can do that. However, I have not heard anything that would cause me to hold this project at this time. I don't think $60 a year is going to make or break anybody in this environment. I think what the impact from this situation is going to cost people 50% of their income, family income minus unemployment, or 100% of their family income minus unemployment. The $60 is not a make or break thing. I don't believe that the North Acton place is a good place for just an EMS station. If we're going to have just an EMS station, we should consider that when at the time we refurb the center station, which is more appropriate for an EMS only station. I don't believe that we should nickel and dime the design of this. We didn't, the reason our stations have lasted 50 and 60 years is because they were well built. And finally, I think this is our little teeny part to bring us out of recession, right? If everybody stops building everything, we're going to be in worse shape than whatever the alternative would have been. So, I haven't heard anything to make me vote differently. I don't know what John thinks, but John Benson thinks. But if you guys want to vote on and write a recommendation letter to the select board, that's something that I'd be interested in hearing. But as of right now, I haven't heard anything that would cause me to change a vote.
I would, if I might say something, I concur with David. I haven't heard anything from Christy or Christine or Jason to cause me to change my mind. It's in our hands, the select board, and we've been given the authorization by 2 overwhelming votes within the town to proceed. And you people supported it by a vote of 8-1. Jason, you gave a very eloquent speech at town meeting on the viability of both the twin school and the fire station projects. That they made sense financially, they were good for the town, and I don't see anything between December and now that would have changed that. I know Christie was opposed to doing the project now and you wanted to put off for a couple of years, but the town has spoken.
Christine?
So I think up until this point, we haven't heard anything from the Board of Selectmen at our previous meetings to give us any hope that you intended to reconsider the 2021 budget. I have a little more hope now, hearing what town manager has said, that you are looking at the 2021 budget and thinking of ways it can be changed to make sense for the future. I think that the North Acton Fire Station, having not yet been bonded, to me, falls into that category for initiatives we're going to have to take to keep the town as strong as possible and to keep the taxes as low as possible through the coming few years. So that's just the way I view it. And so, no, I didn't come straight out to you and say that you should reconsider the fire station, but we have said, and I felt not gotten any traction prior to now, that the 2021 budget needs to not go forward as originally presented for those reasons.
All right. So since we beat that dead horse, let's move on to the point of view addendum. And who wants to kick that up? Christine, do you want to start that off? You're on mute.
Yep, one moment. Oh. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Now I have to move your faces off of my screen. Okay, hopefully you all have time to review this. I'll go through it, and first of all, I cut out a big chunk of the middle, because a big chunk of the middle was all information that led up to the December 12th vote. So it has been slimmed down. The economic picture hasn't changed, but the way we speak to it should change. So I guess I need to know if any members have any issues with the wording as it is here, or and Aaron, if you want me to make any edits to slide 3. All right, I can't see everybody while I go through this, so Roland, just let me know if somebody's raised their hand, because if I don't hear anything, I'm going to assume you like it.
I will do my best.
All right, I'm going to assume y'all like it, and I'm going to move on.
Please do.
Our town financially, again, I just added one little changed line to sort of bring to the attention that while we've been good with our tax collection, it sets us up for hopefully surviving this current crisis. The tax burden slide has not changed. The demographics slide has not changed. Spending is still the budgets. That has not changed. That's still the same current debt service slide. I took the word proposed off of this slide. Otherwise, it's a go. The debt exclusion, also not a proposed anymore. I imagine that the committee, for the most part, would like me to remove this language that I proposed on the fire station slide, given our most recent discussion.
I think so. Anybody else have a comment on that?
Well, do we want to take a quick count on that?
Sure. How about just really quickly, raise your hand if you want me to remove that paragraph.
You can't see me, but I do.
Hannah, Steve, Roland.
I'm assuming Mike.
Mike, your feeling on that?
You're on mute, Mike.
You're muted.
I just see that it's no longer a potential project, it's a real project.
Right, but do you see the highlighted paragraph? Do you agree with that paragraph or not? I'm assuming the answer is no.
No, I don't.
Okay. So do we have 5 that are against? So we got Sahana, Mike, Steve Noon was clear.
Yep.
So let's ask Dave and Roland. If we get to 5, then we'll have to pull this out.
I think we should remove that.
That's 4. Dave, Mr. Willinghoff.
Yeah, sorry, I'm reading it on a phone. It's a little difficult. The finance committee's position that we reconsider bonding. Yeah, it sounds like we're pulling this.
If you would like it pulled, you're the 5th person.
Well, I mean, 2 members of the Board of Selectmen just said they're not in support of this, so it's kind of a dead topic, isn't it?
It doesn't mean it's not our recommendation.
Oh, I see. I don't know. I don't think it should be in this right now. I mean, this is a wider discussion, I would say, than the verbiage of what goes in the presentation. We should probably debate this more and not worry about what goes into this section right now.
Unfortunately, this is our opportunity to discuss it, right? This is the instrument that we use to.
Well, I think Steve's point is valid in that, these opportunities, the town, I agree the environment has, I disagree with the point that this was the environment 3 months ago and we operate in a static environment and that nothing ever changes. But I think Steve's point in my mind was more valid that, we could be here 5 or 10 years from now still debating this, and the opportunity now is to do it now. One point I would make is that construction costs are likely going to be lower going into this. So in some sense, we probably have overestimated the ultimate cost to the town of the fire station. Another point I would make is the amount of money is sizable for sure. And I think Christie's point, which I also take to heart, that, we have an option now of doing something with a more material part of the budget. We should take it is important. But, I think instead of maybe targeting this particular project for those reasons, we should consider maybe a more comprehensive view of just the town's budget in FY21 and 22. And I say that giving, we heard from the school and the town on, 20 is kind of baked. We kind of have a good idea what that looks like. 21 is very squishy right now. There's a lot of variables out of our control, et cetera, but it's going to be tighter. And it might be worth doing a more comprehensive view with that as sort of the backdrop. So, I mean, in a nutshell, I tend to agree with Steve, and my primary rationale is how he put it is 5 years from now, we might be lucky that this is back on the table. And then 5 years after that, maybe it's moving forward, but it's a tough one. I mean, is the price probably way too high? Probably. Are there alternatives? I'm not as sure on that. And at the end of the day, I think we just need to be a little more practical. As the Board of Selectmen, 2 of the 5 members are in favor of continuing forward. we would have to have a really strong uphill battle. Otherwise, just a sort of a philosophic victory here that we're just putting a stake in the sand for just to say we did. So with that said, we probably don't need to debate this a whole lot, but I do think we should keep in mind the overarching point of, you know, FY21 is going to probably be a lot tighter than most people expect. And we're going to want to start approaching all of these large projects and small items with a lot more scrutiny than we have in the past. I mean, we've really had a long period of, you know, enjoying the Neswick funds of, you know, 10 years of economic growth, et cetera, and it's going to become a much more, I think, tenuous atmosphere rather than, hey, town meeting, here's 3 projects. Do you want all 3? Yay. More like, hey, you know, where do we want to make some choices? And so anyways, that's my long-winded answer. I think we should pull this because I don't see there being much point in having it in here. It's just my view. Broadly, I've not fully formed an opinion, but I tend to fall in Steve's camp about getting us in there. And I do think we should, you know, be more sensitive now to every budget item going forward. So that's my long rambling. I've said enough for tonight. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
We'll change that to get potential off that because it's already a project.
I'll fix the formatting later.
Cool.
All right. This slide is unchanged. So I'm going to move on straight to our concerns and recommendations.
Christine?
Yes.
Back to the coming projects. The fire station debt service sounds like it will be a different amount just because it's going to be cheaper if they go to short-term bonds and they won't be taking the full amount out. So we ideally would update that.
Okay. Is that information that Steve or Brian, you guys could get to me? Or when could I possibly get that information, those numbers?
Or maybe just put an asterisk next to it saying it's pending. The real number is come later.
I don't know if Steve's out there, but Christine, we're going out to the short-term market, I think, on the 11th. So anyhow, within probably a week or so, we'll have probably some numbers for you, so we can get that out to you. But it'll be a little bit of time, but we'll get that for you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
Until then, I will take Mike's point and put a little asterisk there. Okay. Please take a look at the changes on this slide and let me know your thoughts.
I think that there are a multitude of economic indicators that suggest a recession is currently occurring. I beg to differ that we are in a recession.
Well, you need 6 months.
We'll have that very quickly.
We will, but I'm trying to be, you know.
I know, but I mean, the reality is that we have over 25% unemployment right now in the country.
Yep. So on the very next slide, I'm just going to switch real quick. I talked to the recession real quick, and I do say at the bottom there, while we can't know for certain that we are experiencing recession until 6 months have passed, it is clear that we are in an unprecedented period of job loss and economic instability. So I'm just going to go back real quick.
Okay,
so,
with that said, then does
that cover what you're trying to get at there?
Yeah, because I think we need to maybe put the slide 15 in 14's place and 14 and 15 maybe.
Can I just make a comment here?
Sure.
So, with the recession, what we are looking at right now compared to the 2008 recession, the 2008 recession was mainly caused by the real estate market, going down. With this, it is totally different. And though we will see unemployment and economic activity having a negative impact, the since the real estate market is strong, I mean, it's the same. Things have not been affected in that for us as a town. I don't think we should be seeing a whole lot of change in the revenue coming in through the taxes than what had happened in 2008 and where the values had fallen down. So comment on that. I mean, this was something that just thinking.
Christy? Hey, Christine?
My understanding is that even when we have a decline in real estate values, our taxes don't go down, town revenue doesn't go down. It's just that our tax rate goes up. So, Hannah, I don't think it's actually comparable in that way. The only thing we would be looking at decreasing would be a decrease in state aid potentially. People have been around longer than me. Can you please clarify whether what I said was correct or fix everything that wasn't?
I'll let Steve Noon comment on that, or Mike. Steve?
Sure. Yes, the budget sets the tax rate. When property values go down, it will take a year, 2, 3 to work through the system, but then assessed values will go down. And we do, set our taxes based on assessed values. So in 2010 or 11, property values had gone down. The assessments leveled off. I don't know if they ever went down, or they might have went down 1 year. And so what happens is property taxes as a revenue leveled off. So, but things like new growth fell faster because nobody was improving or investing. Building permit fees fell, and excise tax on cars and boats and things fell. So there was some revenue impact, as well as the bigger issue, which was costs kept going up when revenue didn't.
Christy?
Is the reason revenue didn't go up because people weren't asked for more taxes, basically? You could have had a Prop 2.5 override, but revenue can go up however much the townspeople will approve it at town meeting, right?
Yeah, we did not. I mean, it's recession's not a great time to ask for a tax increase.
Well, I agree with that. I'm just saying, as you once told me, assessment is just who pays the taxes, not how much taxes do we pay.
Assessed value says how we share the burden.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you what the burden is.
Yes. Okay. Thank
you. All right.
Okay, Christine, keep going.
Okay, so everybody else is good with the language on this slide. I'm going to move on unless I hear otherwise. And we may have to, sorry, that was this slide we were speaking to. And then this slide speaks specifically to probability of recession. And then recommendations are on the following slide, which I'll move to in a second after everybody has a chance to read this.
Christine?
Yeah.
The state, under one of the CARES programs, was awarded $2.67 billion in federal funds, provided it goes for COVID-19 related expenses. That money is going to be there. It's just a question of how COVID related expenses is defined.
Okay.
So that'll be, you may want to drop a.
All right.
Well, John, the there's two sides of the state problem. One is covering the expenses, which the CARES Act did provide some money for. The other is the revenue shortfall, which just the income tax and sales tax, meals tax impact, which so far there's been no federal money for. So when we talk about the revenue shortfall being in the 4 to 6 billion range, that's what I've read. The estimates are.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing about. I'm not arguing about that. I was just saying if you could just drop a note that there may be 2.67 billion available,
and hopefully we haven't spent it all yet, but we've spent a lot. They've done a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will be sure to note that. I'm actually just going to leave myself a little note. All right, and then recommendations. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna give you guys more access to all of the words. Are we good?
And
okay. Our land purchases. Would that be the Kelly's Corner project land acquisitions?
Not in my book. That's leveraged funds. That project can't go forward without those acquisitions, and we would lose out on quite a bit of funding if we halted that.
Absolutely.
I'm happy to put a little note about, outside of the Kelly's Corner. I just meant no new land purchases that we hadn't already.
Sell River Street. Sell the River Street parcel, bring some revenue.
You're gonna buy it, Jason? No. Roland, sorry.
I was buying it in the first place.
When you talk about road paving projects, we have, I think it's 110 miles of town roads, and every year we repave 3 miles, 1.5 in the spring and 1.5 in the fall. Is that aimed at freezing that out for a year or so?
Not necessarily. The reason why I asked this to be put in is I go back to the same argument that Doug Tyndall had 4 or 5 years ago. We've got a plan. We've got 3 miles a year or whatever it is we need to do, and we do it whether it needs to be done or not. I would much prefer that rather than just automatically saying we're going to do 3 miles or whatever, $3 million, whatever the plan is, I would much prefer to see a much more detailed needs-based approach to it. And John, you and I discussed this when you called me last week.
Yeah, you had raised it. Now it's in here, so the group can discuss it.
Okay, so I would just like to make sure that now is not the time to just have a program be on autopilot and say, okay, well, for every year we've done X number of miles at Y number of dollars. I'd like to see a much clearer needs-based approach to this and see where we can save some money.
Well, John, would you care to comment on how the roads program, the road repaving is calculated?
Yeah, sure. Let me turn myself back on here. So I think that we use a pavement management system through engineering, and they analyze the pavement conditions and make decisions on the annual paving program based on several factors. The interesting thing about road repaving is sometimes repaving roads in better condition is better for the long-term lifespan of all your road network than the ones that are in rough shape but not totally destroyed. So there's a science that goes into it, and I can assure you that the funding that we put towards it is as much as we feel as we can responsibly put towards it. But if it was Corey's way, we'd be putting a lot more into it every year. So I think what the amount we invest in it is enough that we think we can do in a given year, and it's an appropriate amount. But it's certainly not a situation that we have a surplus of funding for paving. We need more. Every year we get what we think we can do and what's reasonable, but it's not like a situation where we're getting just an amount of money and then going out and spending it.
Yeah, I would like some recognition that perhaps times have changed, and that what was the right amount of money last year might not be the right amount of money this year.
Roland, could I ask a question?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just really quick. I'm sorry for being ignorant on this issue, but does Chapter 90 money go into the paving projects or just other highway projects?
Chapter 90 is used for paving and roadway projects. Yes, that's the largest chunk that we have. We actually, if you look at the 21 budget, we actually reduced paving in the 21 budget from 20 already, and relying more on some capital projects we were planning and Chapter 90.
And is Chapter 90 a percentage? Like, does it have to be 50-50 or some ratio between the town and the state, or can we use it until it's used up? Or
no, we get an annual allotment, and then we use it all on road paving and related efforts. And so, in some projects are paid entirely by Chapter 90, and some a portion, but most of the road paving that we do is through Chapter 90.
Oh, thank you.
So John, it sounds like to me what you're saying is that historically speaking, we are already pretty bare bones on paving, and that any reduction would be maybe not feasible or not safe or not.
No, we'll certainly look at the paving program and every program if we need to, as we prepare scenarios for the 21 budget. But I guess I was just trying to communicate that we're not. There's always more that we could be spending and probably should be spending if you follow the letter of pavement management science, which we try to do that the best we can within reason. So I don't know that it's, yeah, that's all. I mean, we'd be happy to come back and give a more detailed presentation on the whole science of it if you'd like.
I think we're good right there for right now at this point. Go ahead, Christine.
Steve?
Oh, I was just going to say that, when we talk about paving, and maybe we shouldn't get so specific about certain items, but the principle we're talking about is this is anything but usual times. So if we thought this was only going to last 1 year, there's a whole bunch of things that we could defer. To the extent you start deferring things year after year after year, it's not a good idea. So we don't know how long this is going to last. So that's why we really, as John said, I think we have to take a look at everything and see what it is we can realistically say, well, maybe we don't have to do that one this year. So yeah, I think it's paving is a good example, but there are plenty others.
So is it okay that I didn't specifically call out paving to stop it. I just simply said ongoing expenditures such as automatic paving projects as an example.
You might say as an example.
As an example, okay.
Yeah, the wording could be different, but the principle is, we have to look at everything.
All right, I'll just clean that up a little later, but All right, is everybody good with the rest of the slide and the notes?
I'm good.
Sahana, did you want to say something?
Not for this slide, sorry.
That's okay. All right. So the next one has a very small change in which I stated that Middlesex will increase beyond 6% based on Steve's predictions. And that's our concern and our recommendation regarding our people.
Can I go back?
Go ahead, Sahana.
The previous slide, since we are looking at different times right now, it does talk about, the salaries and fringes. And is it a good idea to explain what the fringes are? If someone can explain that to me, because it makes up, I think, with the town budget, it's about 26%, which is a large percentage. So if John or anyone can explain what that is during these times. I mean, I know it was there previously, it was kind of okay, but for now, if we can go back and revisit that.
Sahana, are you asking what the fringes are?
Yeah, well, because that's a big percentage that we are looking at. I think the salaries is about 71%, but the fringes is about 26%.
So for the school, it's 15.
Yeah, for the school, it's 15.
And for the town, it's 26 point, I guess I can make this bigger. 26%. Is that what you were asking? What those percentages were? Okay.
Yeah, but basically an explanation for what comes under the fringes.
Does Steve Barrett, John Mangiarati, or Brian want to comment on that?
So your normal fringes, Sahana, would be health insurance. It would be, I'm trying to think what other benefits we'd have.
Life
Retirement
insurance
would be a standard benefit. So health insurance and retirement are the key ones. Those would be the key ones in my mind.
Steve, do we do life insurance as well?
We do. There's a small town allotment put aside, but yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, and then see if everybody agrees with me on this one.
It's good. Christy?
Two issues. One, protect our employees. To me, my first thought is that we should be making sure they have all the PPE they need, which is not quite what we're going for here. I'm a little concerned that this makes it sound like we would not even consider cutting services or anything that might cut staff. And I don't think that's something we should take off the table as a recommendation. If we're looking at this as a recommendation for 2021, I'm more okay with that and willing to have a discussion for further going forward. But given that we don't know how big this is or how long it's lasting, it sounds awfully nice to say keep everyone employed. But I think that's more of a feel-good sentiment than a necessarily good financial advice.
Christy, do you feel that the cannot be ruled out completely is enough of a qualifier, or is that not enough of a qualifier for you?
I'm sorry, what wording?
While staff cuts cannot be ruled out completely.
I was just reading the slides. Okay, no, I'm okay with that then.
Okay.
But do you want to change the word protect our employees to something like staff reduction in staff should be one of the last options or something, because I always use too many words. Sorry.
I could just get rid of the word protect, and because the bullet point speaks to our employees.
Actually, it's probably better to say protect your services or protect our services. Services and employees are practically the same thing in this business. So when you start talking about employees, yeah, it's your teachers, firemen, policemen.
Okay.
I would suggest
Services people pay for.
delete the whole bullet item. Or,
Yeah.
you know, why are town employees any more or less vulnerable than in, you know, your job or your neighbor's job or anyone else's job? You know,
I don't think
you
they
all have
are.
to- if we have to, well, we can't protect them. Is what I'm saying.
That's what I meant about the feel good. It seems like a nice sentiment that doesn't necessarily make economic sense.
Right. That's why I scratched that whole line item.
Steve, this came from your 2 cents worth email. Do you want to speak to it?
Well, certainly I've read where there are cities and towns, not only nationwide, but in Massachusetts that are already cutting back on employees. So in my list of things to do in a financial recession, this is one of the last things on the list. And when I was talking earlier about you start with things you'll hardly miss and you move down to things you almost never want to consider doing at the bottom of the list. This is right there with raising taxes as far as I'm concerned. And we can all have a lengthy debate on which order you hit this one, whether you raise taxes first or lay off people. But since we're one of the audiences for the point of view is the public, their concern is what kind of services can we expect to get? And you know, in my opinion, like I said, the employees and the services are pretty well interconnected, and you can't cut one without cutting the other. So if we're trying to tell people what we think we should try and do with the people is we should keep enough people to protect our services.
Okay. The OPEB slide is unchanged. The OPEB recommendation, we might need to give a little more theoretical wiggle room to the schools.
It's difficult to talk to both OPEBs with the same language. Because the town is sufficiently funded.
Right, I don't think I do.
The schools are not. So, but.
Right, but I think I called them out individually.
Yeah.
Christy?
Can we back up 2 slides? What I think we ended up with was Steve's idea that services should not be cut. And I want to make sure that that's what we as a committee agree on, because that's a significant statement to be making.
Well, I think they should not be cut unless it's as a last resort.
I just think that's worthy of discussion.
Okay.
Well, services have already been cut.
Because of the freeze in hiring, Mike, or because of something else?
Both. Well, one is they're directly linked. I just think it's such a temporary issue that I don't think it needs to be in their point of view. By the time this gets resolved and published and discussed, you know, we'll be moving on to something else.
I think you have a very short-term view of
disagree with that.
this crisis that
I do.
I don't share. I think we're going to be doing this for a good year to 18 months if we're lucky.
Well, we better not be, or else this stuff will become very irrelevant. The numbers will just be. It's just I can't imagine the consequences. They'll be catastrophic.
I have seen no evidence to suggest that we're going back to normal anytime in the next 2 years.
They're currently talking the D word over in Europe.
Say that again, Christy.
They're currently talking about there possibly being a depression over in Europe. I think there is a very good chance that this is going to take a long time.
Well, when you consider other industries, like the airlines are only flying 5% of their schedule because nobody's traveling. Boston University is not going to have any students back in the fall. They're not going to start back until maybe January. I don't know when I'm going to be going back to my office. My wife doesn't know when she's going back to hers. She took a pay cut. Reality, she took a pay cut, but she still had a job. My neighbor up the street got a call from his employer, thought he'd be getting a raise. He got a 20% pay cut. That's the reality that we're in these days. I don't think that this is going to be resolved. Everybody's going to go back to work, and by June or July, we're all going to be back to normal. Not going to happen. You look at Disney World, it's been shut down since March. They don't know when they're going to reopen. They have thousands of hotel rooms and conventions in the parks, and that drives over 30% of their revenue. Well, that's not going to come back. Car manufacturers are not opening their plants back up. People are not buying vehicles. I had to get mine serviced tomorrow. It's another story. I knew I'd have to buy a vehicle probably by next year at this time. That's most likely not going to happen, especially since I'm not driving.
Well, that's the whole point. We don't know. So
right.
Much of this stuff then is moot.
I disagree, Mr. Majors. We don't know, but the fact that we don't know, I would suggest leads us to have to err on the side of being conservative about this. I think that with 30 million Americans unemployed in 1 week, which is almost 35 times the number of people who have ever been unemployed in 1 month in the past. The question that I definitely would love to have a crystal ball answer to is, when do those 30 million people go back to work? I do not subscribe to the theory that this is all going to be taken care of by the end of the summer and everybody's going to be back to work. I think the unemployment and the demand destruction that has occurred as a result of this is an ongoing problem. And so you said earlier that you can't imagine that we'd still be doing this 12 to 18 months from now. I don't imagine that airfare is going to be depressed 95% and that 7 states in the country are going to be under stay-at-home orders for 12 to 18 months. But I absolutely believe that the economic disruption as a result of this virus is going to long outlast the summer. I think that this is not going to be an FY21 only problem. I think this is going to be a 3 to 5 year economic problem. And I don't want to sound alarmist here, but I think it's going to be a 3 to 5 year economic problem if we're lucky. At the peak of the Great Depression, the peak unemployment rate hit 24.9%. I would argue we're above that right now. And yes, obviously duration matters, but we're not going to be back at 5-6% unemployment by the end of August. I beg to differ.
Oh, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying if some of these worst case scenarios were in fact true, it's doomed. Everything is there won't be any tax revenue. There won't be any jobs. You don't even want to look at that scenario.
But it's our job to look at that scenario.
They're going to get a handle on this sooner or later, and it might be later rather than sooner, but it's not going to be. And there will be long-term repercussions with the numbers will, but eventually, the economy will start to tip up. The stock market still is pretty hardy. It's showing signs of recovery, but I think it just needs a few things to happen and things will start to turn around. And I just think we have to be more positive.
I love your optimism, but I would not plan on that optimistic approach.
Fine.
Back to Steve's sentence here. What I believe is saying is that we don't want to, institutional knowledge is the wrong thing. We don't want to just go cut a whole bunch of people now because people are expensive. If you look at the budgets, if you're going to tackle the biggest wedges, it's salaries and fringe. We don't want to just cut a bunch of people and then in 5 years be like, okay, we need to hire a bunch more people again because that's disruptive in a number of ways. Am I anywhere close to what you're saying, Steve?
Yeah, you're getting there. But are we getting more specific than we need to be? What we really need to say is that there have to be plans that will, however you want to use the term, match expenses with revenues. And that we expect both the town and the schools to come up with those plans.
Why don't we just say that?
I think that's probably the better way to do it.
May I make a comment?
Sure, Dave, go ahead.
Dave, go right ahead.
So I think the 21 budget is going to be just a real guess. There'd be no way to have, if we knew what was going to happen, people would pay us for that knowledge, right? And we'd have, but nobody knows what's going to happen. So I think, we need a pretty flexible 21 budget. But then what we need to do is react quickly during the year. I believe that, after each quarter's tax receipts, we need to very seriously look at, is it completely on track and we're all set? Is it down a few percent? And then or is it down more than a few percent? And how we project that out for the rest of the year and take action as soon as we see any problem, right? But we're not going to know about those problems, I believe. We're not going to know about those problems ahead. We just need to be fast on our feet. That's my opinion. I don't know whether you guys agree with that or how you would articulate that.
If this were a business, what we'd be setting up now is a set of triggers and steps. If cash flow falls to this point, we will implement steps A through B. If it falls below this point, we'll do C, D, E, and F. And yes, you'd monitor it all year long. And that's really what I think we need to come up with what the triggers are and what we the finance committee doesn't necessarily have to come up with the triggers, but the town and schools have to come up with what are your triggers and what are your steps and how do they match.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of my points is that we can't wait too long because we don't want to hit a wall and then have to, have the bottom drop out of everything. We want to, if we have to make cuts in places or do whatever we need to do, we want it to be as gradual as possible, and as planned and as controlled as possible.
And you want the early steps that you take to be things that can be done pretty much instantaneously. And the last steps to be things that take a long time. It takes a long time to raise taxes. It takes a long time to get rid of employees.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway,
those are things you don't want to necessarily have high on your list of quick action items.
Right. I think we're saying very similar things.
All right. Moving on.
Hold on. I still don't know what the slide should say.
Me either, but I'm going to reach out to you and Steve in the coming days, and we're going to come up with some language and run it by the committee and see if we can find something everyone agrees on. Okay?
Sounds good. Yep.
Thank you. All right, so OPEB, this slide hasn't changed. This one simply speaks to the fact that while we want things from the school as far as increased funding, it probably doesn't make sense to push for it right now. And the least they should do is continue funding at their current levels. Steve, I know this is a big one in your book. Is this reasonable to you?
That's reasonable. My fear is if they drop it,
Yep.
they'll never put it back.
Yes,
It was
agreed.
too hard to get them to do it the first time.
Right. Okay. I left the North Acton Fire Station in here simply because we haven't bonded it yet. So it's still kind of theoretical. And it's happening in the next 1 to 5 years. This hasn't changed.
I would argue that the North Acton Fire Station should stay there, if nothing else, because the final bond, it sounds like, won't be issued until the next year's budget anyhow.
Okay, agreed. And then our recommendations as far as future capital projects. Just says this one change.
Is great. I like that wording.
Okay. Reserves is unchanged. Reserve policy. Based on Steve's email, this seemed to be the correct statement regarding reserves.
Yeah.
Okay. Land purchases is unchanged, and our recommendations is that we freeze land purchases, though, again, not as they pertain to the Kelly's Corner project, which I'll address.
I think something to consider with land purchases, though, too, is also don't forget that there is a big slug of money sitting in CPC that can be used for land purchases if it meets the requirements with a deed restriction, which just so means that the money is already there. It's sitting there, that they would just tap that money, use that, and you wouldn't see any change in your taxes.
So outside of CPC funding, this would be.
I'd say something like outside of CPC funding.
All right. I'm gonna.
And what I don't agree with CPC funding is what they did with the Wright Hills, where they bonded it, because now you're stuck with that bond, where maybe you could have bought that with what was in the fund at the time and not have a bigger chunk in there now. But that's in the past. That's in the past. I would hope that when they look at future purchases, that CPC will not be using a bonding mechanism to do that. That they'll use it out of the funds that they have, not taking out bonds. Because if for some reason the town decided to dissolve CPC, the town meeting did, the town is still on the hook to continue paying that bond until it is paid off.
Okay. All right, last slide. Made it to the end. Yes, Christy. Sorry.
I would like to go back to having a discussion. I'm sorry. I'd like to go back a few slides and have a discussion about our reserve policy. I think the way we stated on the slide is a much softer recommendation than I have sensed within the committee. And we have a chance right now specifically to speak to the currently forecast fiscal year 22-23 expectations of the use of reserves. We can put a strong statement in here around what Steve said about matching revenues with expenses. We have a chance right now to say, I mean, to some degree, this is why we have reserves, is for difficult situations like this, but we also need to change the planned use of reserves going forward.
Okay. Do you want to do that with me outside of this meeting, and then we'll?
I would love to.
You want to talk about it now?
I have a strong opinion.
Okay.
I want to hear what other people think.
Anybody in the finance committee, go right ahead.
Well, this is a rainy day, right? I mean, if we want to maintain services, we're going to almost necessarily have to eat into reserves.
Which is what it's for. And,
Right.
and the amount of reserves we have is within our policy as far as the low and the high. It's, you know, it's in theory, according to our recommendation, the correct amount of reserves to have.
But projected budgets for the next few years have an assumption of using reserves and then replenishing them with turnbacks.
So I guess I would rather have a conversation about projected budgets. And
I would suggest that the assumption of replenishment is more tenuous at this time.
It's a study in and of itself, but most turnbacks don't come from expense underruns. They come from revenue overruns. And I don't see a whole lot of revenue overruns in the next few years. So yeah, turnbacks may not be what they were. There was at least 1 year when they were not at all. So yeah, this is more about why we need to do an accurate forecast of our expenses, because to match our expenses with revenue, first we need to take a look at where our expenses are, and then see how closely we are under what scenarios we can devise to matching them and using some reserves. This is the rainy day. Best case scenario is we get through the next 3 years and we only use up a good part of what we have in reserves now. Worst case scenario is we got to make some cuts and lay off some people or raise taxes. They're all possibilities.
Do we want to then say something to the effect of, I can't think of a good phrase for it, make more precise or better financial projections to strategically use reserves?
That's a good way to put it.
like, is that what you want, Christy? Is that?
I would also add right there, previous years assumption of replenishment rates should be more.
But yeah, I looked at one not anticipated in the future, in the coming years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Or in future years.
Yep. Thank you.
In order to strategically make better use of reserves, the financial projections actually have to be more detailed. They're very hand wavy. Oh, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yes, that is true.
Do you want a statement to that effect, Christy?
I would like that up on the slide.
Up on the main slide?
Yeah,
Even hand wavy?
even. I'll wave my hands during the presentation if you want.
Say the heart of that again, or what do you want? What do you think you want?
Financial projections should be more detailed.
Yeah. Or at the moment or two high level, or however you want to.
Financial projections need more detail.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. Are you okay with that, Christy? Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, if you have thoughts afterwards, just let me know.
Thank you.
Okay,
Last slide.
last slide.
It should say a recession is likely, if not here already.
Yeah, technically, it's not declared until after 2 quarters by some federal authority that, writes obituaries or something, but
Oh, that would be the Oval Office.
it's here.
That's
Yeah.
why I hesitated to say it outright, but I'm fine with.
Maybe you could say, in all reality, a recession is here now,
That's a lot of words.
or is here. It's but it gets
In
the point.
all but name.
A recession is here in all but name. I'm good with that.
Operating budgets should aim for minimum possible increases, if any. Should have put on the end of that.
Do you want me to change that, Roland? You want it to say minimum?
Well, operating budget should aim for minimum possible increases, if any, given this in this economic environment. How great would it be if next year we could go into the following year, FY22, with the same budget we have proposed to this year, so no increase. Something that's reality, but it'd be great if it could.
It's definitely what we recommend.
Right.
Put it in the slide part too, not just in the notes.
Right. Yep.
Level funded, so to speak.
Although level funding still will have an increase because of contractual obligations.
Right. I mean,
Middlesex,
your contractual obligations that you have with salaries and from the police and from the different unions, that's going to happen. But if you keep everything else at a minimum, I know my gas expenses have gone way significantly down recently. Now, my electric has gone significantly up. So, I mean, it's things like that if you can control as much as you humanly can.
Sorry.
And I think to Mike Major's point earlier, we're trying to put a balance here between we have to tighten our belts and the sky is not in fact falling. This isn't an austerity budget that we're going for.
No, I think it's more of if the sky happens to fall, how much toilet paper did we buy before it started?
Yes.
Not enough.
No, not enough. All right. I relinquish control of my screen and I'll be sending you all a couple of slides to confirm verbiage in the next week or so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Town manager and board of selectmen, any other further updates that we haven't gone over this evening?
Yeah, John will provide an operational update and David will provide an update on COVID-19. David is our liaison to the Board of Health and they met last evening. John?
Hello again. So the operational update that I have prepared for you is, I'll say everything except for the Board of Health stuff that I believe David will cover, but the mask ban, mask order came into effect today. One thing I wanted to make sure all the Finance Committee members know is that we've established a new service to help our community who may have questions. What we've heard from the governor's office is that on May 18th, they will be making some announcements about what it's going to look like in Massachusetts in the coming weeks and months. And we don't expect everything to be turned on May 19th, but we do expect to see some things get phased in certain ways and with certain thresholds. And what it's going to mean is a lot of questions about, is this open? Is that available? What's going on with this? And since March, we've had many town employees working remotely, and our IT group has done a great job of setting everybody up to work remotely. And we are still staffing town hall on a skeleton basis. But it's important for me to make sure that when someone calls with questions that they speak to a person rather than getting a voicemail and then having to figure out, when they're going to hear back from somebody. So we've established a town services hotline, which is the number is 978-929-6619. And we're staffing this with an interdepartmental team of administrative staff and professional staff that are all committing to answer that line on a set schedule to make sure that someone is available and has answers to frequently asked questions and can direct residents to resources. We set this up initially as a COVID hotline, but a lot of the calls on COVID are going directly to nursing. So, but this is just another tool that we provide to the community to help with, as I said, in the coming months, I think there'll be a lot of questions. So we want to make sure there's one place for people to call. I think the Finance Committee at the last meeting talked a little bit about small business relief, and we made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen, I believe earlier or the end of April, and the board approved a measure to allow groceries to be sold by local restaurateurs, which is a way to help them move some of their inventory and keep their vendor relationships intact during this difficult time. We've also applied for small business grants through the Attorney General's office. I did see today some cities notifying that they received grants. We have not heard back, so I'll let you know if we do. We've also looked at some of the signage regulations that we typically enforce pretty strictly with regards to temporary signage, and we've stepped back some of that enforcement to try to help some of our small businesses get noticed if they are open and during this emergency period. The 4th of July celebration, which is a big deal, has been canceled from Nara Park, and all of the great concerts that we usually hold there in the first half of the summer have been canceled as well. That's up until July 15th, and then we're going to evaluate the concerts scheduled after that later. We're also doing a takeout selfie campaign, so if you go grab takeout, and if you have a cell phone that you can safely take a picture of yourself, post it online, and we'll help some of our restaurants get noticed as being open and safely serving food. I wanted to make sure that you all know about the Java with John program. This is a program that was held at the Senior Center over the last year and a half or so. And since the stay-at-home advisory, we started doing it virtually every Friday morning, and we've had some pretty good response from the seniors and from residents in general. Last week, we had a great panel of local business leaders who told us about how their businesses have been impacted by this and some of the things that they've done to pivot and provide new services and keep their people employed. This Friday, we'll be talking with some medical professionals, Heather York, our great public health nurse, and Dr. Knights, who's our medical control doctor, and he works at Acton Medical. So we'll dive into some questions that everyone has on COVID and how it's impacting Acton. That's 10 a.m. on Friday morning. Acton Boxborough United Way has, as you know, have an impact fund, a COVID-19 impact fund, and they recently released the eligibility requirements for the grants that they're writing from that impact fund. Laura Ducharme in our organization and her counterpart in Boxborough are taking the lead on screening applications from residents. We've done, I think she's done about a dozen so far on behalf of that program, helping our residents. So it's a great program. More details are available online. The elections, the selectmen voted to consolidate the polling places. So everybody votes at the RJ Gray on election day. And as I mentioned earlier, we're highly encouraging people to vote using the mail-in process. Speaking of mail, we as a Friday, we're putting in the mailbox a 6-page municipal monthly sent to all households. The municipal monthly is an online feature, but we decided to send it to all households and have it focused on COVID-19 and all the resources that we have available. So that will be there. And on the back page of that mailing is actually an application to submit to the town clerk's office to get a mail-in ballot. So we're trying to provide several ways for people to access that service. And finally, just an update on a couple of projects. You talked about CPA funds. We have a couple of CPA projects that are on hold, which we are really excited to get started with this spring. The Narrow Park Miracle Fields bathroom facility we went out to bid, and we have a contractor ready to go. We're just a little bit delayed from the emergency construction ban, and also the Asa Parlin House. We have a contractor ready to go. Both of these projects are using state budget earmarks, which were supposed to be spent by June 30th. And I'm not counting on that funding being available for a day after June 30th. So we're going to try our best to get those projects going, hopefully this month, so that we can take advantage of that grant and do the rest of the work. Then we'll continue to do updates every Board of Selectmen meeting and daily updates online. I just sent one out during the meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, John. My wife did see Coffee with the Town Manager and thought that was very well. You did a great job with that, so I just wanted to pass it on to you.
Thanks.
Really informative. So now we have
quick update on the Board of Health.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
So the Board of Health has been meeting once or twice a week, more twice than once, monitoring the situation and seeing if they needed to take any actions. Over the past month, they've closed down the use of NARA, limited parking in a number of our parks and rail trail parking lots, and set up certain standards that the groceries and other facilities in town have to follow. The health department has been very busy, reaching out to all the stores and enforcing the rules, such as either rules or advisories, depending on the situation. For example, for spacing at registers or one-way aisles, or sneeze guards in places and things like that. They've just done both the board and the health department have done a tremendous job. In last night's meeting, the Board of Health passed a local version of the governor's order requiring masks, basically requiring masks in all town facilities and in a number of types of stores in town. So, and in any place really where you cannot maintain the proper spacing. That's all.
Thank you, David. So we have Finance Committee business. We do have meeting.
Questions?
Whoops. Questions, go ahead.
You're still on mute, Steve. You're still on mute, Steve.
The one of the earliest outbreaks was in a life care facility in Washington State, and certainly life care of Neshoba Valley in Littleton was a serious COVID hotspot. When I checked the state's dashboard on the life care facility in Acton, it just kind of gives kind of minimal information that there's been somewhere between 10 and 30, I think, is the way they break it out on the state report. Is there a serious issue going on at that facility in Acton, or do we know?
David, John?
Oh, so Heather York has been in touch with the local director of life care here in Acton for the last month and a half, communicating on a regular basis. Last week, they did extensive testing of everybody. The whole facility was tested. And as a result, there was a spike in the number of cases in Acton. I believe they tested 100 and some odd people. And they tested
yeah.
23.
About 160 residents there, something like that.
23 were reported to be positive. So since then and before then, they were separating people in accordance with state guidelines, and they appear to be managing it under the state's guidance pretty well. It's definitely a high risk situation, but I think from what Heather tells me, they're doing a great job considering the circumstances of managing it at that facility.
Good to know.
What was Roland? What was interesting about that? The number of, I think it was 23 of the 24 folks that tested positive. 23 were asymptomatic.
Interesting. Jason.
Couple of things I'd like to just touch upon. First of all, I would like to definitely compliment you on the communications. I think that the daily reports that go out in the evening are must-read communications, and I want to thank you and compliment you on doing that. I have three quick questions. The first one is actually with regard to the nightly communications. I see that we're posting number of cases, number of quarantine. Am I reading that properly, that there have been no fatalities, and or will we report fatalities if they occur, or have we made the determination not to report fatalities?
Right, we're not reporting that detail.
Okay. That's I'm surprised. Okay. Next thing that I wanted to point out, actually this is in regards to your presentation from earlier. I'm very surprised to see that we only have about $50,000 in increased costs as a result of COVID. Is that, did I read that properly in your presentation earlier?
Yes.
I'm pleasantly surprised that it's that light. Do you anticipate that being, do you expect there to be a spike in that in the future, or is that?
Yeah, so we are in the process.
It seems low to me, sorry.
Well, we're doing our best to try to do it safely and effectively. But the one thing that we haven't started doing yet is retrofitting spaces. We have an election coming up. We're going to have to be buying a lot of equipment for that, or we're already buying the equipment for that. So you'll start to see some expenses come through. Depending on what happens with town meeting, there may be some increased expenses there. There's certainly plenty of expenses that are on their way. But as of April 30th, that's where we were.
Thank you. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out, I think this is more for John Benson and for Selby. In our last meeting, we were asked for recommendations, things that we can recommend to try and help the small businesses. In particular, I sent an email about some of the changes to the Restaurant Week page, and over and above what I sent earlier, I'd like to suggest that having a Board of Health thumbs up for a specific eatery might be a way for us to help drive traffic and confidence into that small business. So, John, I'd like to put that on top of what I sent to you earlier in my previous email. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just address that, John.
Go ahead.
So that Acton Restaurant Week website is a partnership we have with the Middlesex West Chamber of Commerce. It's something that they manage for us, and we appreciate their support. So there's always ways that we can improve things, and we've certainly talked to them about that. But we're also trying to use social media, which is something we control directly. And but we did get your comments, and we appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, so Finance Committee business, we do have meeting minutes that Brian sent out for March 10th. Everybody got a chance to review those quickly. So if anybody wants to make a motion, I will attain one.
Motion to approve.
There's a second. Christine, you're on mute, but that's okay. I know you said Sue. So we need to have a roll call vote. So I'll start with Sahana.
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Christy,
Aye.
Yes.
Christine. That was Mike, I believe. Christine,
Yes.
What's that, Martha?
Dave, well enough.
Yes.
Mike, you already approved. Jason,
Abstain.
and I approve. So the motion passes. Finance Committee business. Does anybody have any subcommittee updates? Mike Majors?
Yeah, there's a follow-up to John and Jason's comments. The Economic Development Committee will be meeting soon. And we have a whole list of shopping list of things that we're going to talk about in the form of a small business relief package, things that we could do or we would like to do, how much it would cost, and things of that nature. John already addressed some of it, but we're going to, we have some pretty concrete ideas, and hopefully next time we meet as a finance committee, we'll have some feedback from EDC and Shelby about more specifics to get this recovery going.
Thank you. So I guess the committee, is anybody any other updates? I guess what I have, do you think we should meet in 2 weeks?
When's the ALG meeting?
The 20th.
20th ALG meeting.
So we should meet so 2 weeks from today is the 20th. So that's when you guys are meeting. So
We're meeting in the morning.
We'll meet in the morning meeting.
Oh, then yes, by all means, we should meet in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. I will write that down and get an agenda together. I had a question for Brian that I should have asked earlier. In regards to revenues, or maybe it's a Steve Barrett question. I don't know if he's still on. I guess he's not. Has revenue from the commuter lot, has that gone down? You're on mute, Brian.
Yeah, as far as I know, Roland, we've had that discussion internally. They have declined. If you want, I can try to report on that for the 20th. I'll give you some detail behind that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. That'd be great. I'm just kind of curious because I know my commuting expenses are going way down, so I figured it's just natural.
All right.
So, does Mr. Knoll, do you want to make a recommendation right now?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm pleased to report currently parking isn't an issue at the train station.
Great. So we don't need a parking garage right now. I love it. Mr. Knoll, you can take yourself off mute. I know you keep pushing the camera all night. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm not going to ask.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, now we have to have a roll call vote. Sahana.
Aye.
Christy.
Aye.
Christine.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Jason.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.
Stay safe. Oh, Steve, I should have asked you. Sorry. Yeah, no, thank you. We'll be in touch, guys.
Thank
you very
Have a
much.
good night.
Thank you to everybody who attended this evening.